1939, the Daimler Works, Radford Road, Coventry, England. A machine rolls off the production line and into the pale light of a factory floor still smelling of luxury car leather. It is absurdly small, 4 feet 11 inches tall, 10 feet 5 inches long. It weighs barely 3 tons, less than a London taxicab loaded with passengers. 2 men sit inside it, hunched beneath a slab of armoured steel, peering through slits no wider than a letterbox. It carries no turret, no cannon. Its only weapon is a single Bren-light machine gun poking through a slot in the front plate. It looked like a toy. Officers who inspected it wondered aloud what exactly it was supposed to do. It was too small to fight, too lightly armed to hold ground, too cramped to carry supplies. Skeptics in the War Office called it a waste of good steel. They were wrong. Over the next 6 years, this machine would serve in France, North Africa, Italy, Normandy, Belgium, Holland, and Germany. It would be operated by more than a dozen regiments across 3 continents. It would prove so mechanically reliable that soldiers rebuilt wrecked ones from scrapyard hulks rather than accept a replacement. It would move so fast and crouch so low that enemy gunners simply could not track it. The Italians captured one in the desert, stripped it apart and built their own copy. No replacement was even considered until 7 years after the war ended. Its official designation was the Daimler Scout Car. Every soldier who ever crewed one called it the Dingo, and it was, by nearly universal agreement, the finest scout car of the Second World War. To understand why the Dingo existed, you need to understand the problem Britain faced in 1938. The Munich Agreement had bought time, but it had also revealed the truth. War was coming, and the British Army was desperately short of modern equipment. Among the longest list of deficiencies was reconnaissance. The cavalry regiments converting from horses to armoured vehicles needed a small, fast, stealthy scouting machine that could find the enemy without being found itself. Existing vehicles were too tall, too slow, or too unreliable. The War Office issued a specification demanding a vehicle under 6 feet high, under 3 tons, capable of more than 50 miles per hour, with 4-wheel drive and independent suspension. 3 manufacturers competed. Alvis submitted a design they called the Dingo, named after the Australian wild dog. It was fast but dangerously top-heavy. Morris Commercial was eliminated for poor speed. BSA Cycles, a subsidiary of the Birmingham Small Arms Company, entered a prototype completed in September 1938. By December, it had covered 10,000 miles on and off-road with almost no mechanical failures. The War Office changed the specification mid-competition, demanding heavier armour including a roof. BSA adapted. Their vehicle won. Here is where the story turns delightfully British. The name Dingo belonged to the Alvis prototype that lost the competition, yet the name somehow transferred to the BLA vehicle that won, and it stuck permanently. The official designation was always the Daimler Scout Car, but from privates to generals, everyone called it the Dingo. The key engineer was Sid Shellard, leading a team at BSA. Production was handed to Daimler, the luxury car manufacturer within the BSA group, which had the automotive expertise for serial manufacture. The first order for 172 vehicles was placed in May 1939. 22 were accepted before the year ended. The vehicle itself was a masterpiece of practical engineering. The defining feature was the silhouette. At 4 feet 11 inches, the Dingo crouched lower than a dining table. This was achieved through an ingenious layout called the H-drive. Rather than running a conventional drive shaft underneath the vehicle, which would have raised the floor, separate left and right propeller shafts ran from a central transfer box to bevel gear units at each wheel, all protected inside the chassis channels. The result was a completely flat, smooth underside that let the vehicle slide across rough ground, while keeping the crew compartment extraordinarily low. The heart of the drivetrain was a Wilson pre-selector epicyclic gearbox paired with a Daimler fluid flywheel, technology adapted from Daimler's luxury cars. The fluid flywheel replaced a conventional clutch with 2 bowl-shaped members filled with light oil. As the engine turned, oil was flung through passages in the driving member to strike corresponding passages in the driven member, transmitting torque hydraulically with 0 mechanical contact. This meant no clutch wear, no stalling in any gear, a near-silent operation. For a vehicle designed to sneak up on enemy positions, silence was not a luxury, it was the entire point. 5 forward and 5 reverse gears were available. The entire gearbox could be flipped to reverse through the transfer box, giving the Dingo its most legendary capability. It could reverse at nearly full road speed, 55 miles per hour forward, up to 40 miles per hour backward. The driver's seat was deliberately angled so the driver could look over his left shoulder through a hinged vision flap when backing away from danger. The thickest armour, 30 millimeters, faced forward, exactly where it needed to be when the crew was reversing away from the enemy they had just spotted. The Mark I featured 4-wheel steering with a turning circle of just 23 feet, tighter than most family cars. Inexperienced wartime drivers found this difficult to control. so it was deleted from the Mark II onwards. Independent coil spring suspension on all four wheels provided roughly 8 inches of vertical travel. The tyres were run-flat rubber, nearly solid, virtually immune to punctures. No spare wheel was carried because none was needed. The deliberate absence of a turret was central to the philosophy. The Dingo was not designed to fight. It was designed to see without being seen, then vanish. A turret would have added height, weight, and complexity. The .303 Bren gun was sufficient for self-defense. Nothing more was required. Now, before we get into where this vehicle actually fought, if you are enjoying this deep dive into British wartime engineering, hit subscribe. It takes a second, costs nothing, and helps this channel grow. The Dingo's combat career began in April 1940 during the Battle of France with the British Expeditionary Force, serving alongside the 1st Armoured Division. It was an inauspicious start. Within weeks, the BEF was retreating to Dunkirk, and Dingos were among the vehicles abandoned on the beaches. But the vehicle had shown enough promise in those desperate weeks to guarantee its future. North Africa was where the Dingo made its name. The vast open desert was perfect terrain for a vehicle designed to observe without being observed. The 11th Hussars, known as the Cherry Pickers, became the regiment most closely identified with the Dingo, using them as the reconnaissance element of the 7th Armoured Division, the Desert Rats. The King's Dragoon Guards, the Royal Dragoons, and the Derbyshire Yeomanry also operated Dingos across Libya, Egypt, and Tunisia. In the desert, the Dingo's qualities became devastating. Its 4-foot 11-inch silhouette vanished behind scrub, dunes, and even tall desert grass. Enemy gunners trying to track a vehicle barely visible above the sand line, moving at over 50 miles per hour and capable of reversing just as fast, found it essentially impossible to hit. According to accounts from reconnaissance veterans, the standard tactic was brutally simple. Drive forward until the enemy was sighted, observe, report by radio, then throw the entire gearbox into reverse and back away at 40 miles per hour with 30 millimeters of armor pointed straight at the threat. The fluid flywheel made the transition instantaneous. No clutch to slip, no gears to grind. One moment the Dingo was there, the next it was gone. The 4th Field Squadron, Royal Engineers, adapted Dingos for locating minefields and identifying suitable bridging positions, a role far beyond the original reconnaissance brief. The vehicle's mechanical reliability made it trusted for tasks where a breakdown meant death. In Italy, 11th Hussars Dingos landed at Salerno in September 1943, pushing through to Naples and the Volturno River crossing. The narrow Italian roads and mountainous terrain were less forgiving than the desert, but the Dingo's compact size allowed it to navigate tracks and village streets where larger armoured cars could not follow. In Normandy, Dingos arrived from D-Day +3 onwards. The bocage fighting was brutal for scout cars. One reconnaissance regiment lost 25 scout cars in the first month, half its original strength. Hedgerow country turned every lane into a potential ambush, but when the breakout came in August 1944, the Dingo became invaluable, racing ahead of the main columns to find gaps in collapsing German lines during the 200-mile dash from the Seine to the Belgian border. The 6th Airborne Armoured Reconnaissance Regiment used Dingos in a role the designers could barely have imagined. At just 3 tons, 2 Dingos could fit inside a single Hamilcar glider, making it the most heavily armoured fighting vehicle available to airborne forces. Lieutenant Colonel Giles Vandeleur of the Irish Guards used a Daimler scout car as his command vehicle during Operation Market Garden, directing armoured columns from a machine smaller than his staff car. The Dingo's war ended as dramatically as it began. The 11th Hussars, still in their Dingos and Daimler armoured cars, led the 7th Armoured Division into Hamburg on May 3, 1945. A British reconnaissance unit, riding in the same type of vehicle that had retreated from France 5 years earlier, was among the first Allied formations to reach Belsen concentration camp and among the first to link up with Soviet forces at Wismar on the Baltic coast. The standard late-war reconnaissance troop consisted of 2 Daimler Dingos and 2 Daimler armoured cars, with a full regiment fielding approximately 50 scout cars across its squadrons. Beyond reconnaissance, the Dingo was pressed into service as an officer's command vehicle, an artillery observation post, a medical officer's transport, and in at least one recorded case, a chaplain's personal vehicle, with one regiment issuing a Dingo to its padre, so he could reach wounded men under fire. Total production reached 6,626 vehicles across 5 marks between 1939 and 1945, one of very few British military vehicles manufactured continuously throughout the entire war. This was achieved despite Daimler's Radford works being struck by 150 high-explosive bombs, 3 parachute mines, and 17 delayed action bombs during the Coventry Blitz. When the factory was gutted in April 1941, production was dispersed to a hosiery factory in Leek, an underwear factory in Colville, And agricultural equipment works in a toxeter. Output actually increased. The Italians paid the Dingo the ultimate compliment. Lancia captured an example in North Africa, reverse-engineered every component, and produced 129 copies designated the Autoblinder Linz. They were used by both Italian and German forces from 1943 onwards. Imitation has rarely been so literal. No comparable vehicle of the era matched the Dingo's combination of stealth, protection, and mechanical sophistication. The German SDKFZ 222 was the closest equivalent in role but embodied a fundamentally different philosophy. Armed reconnaissance versus passive stealth. The 222 carried a powerful 20mm autocannon and an MG-34 machine gun. It could engage light armour and infantry at range, but it was 60% heavier at 4.8 tons, significantly taller, mechanically less reliable, and suffered from poor cross-country performance. For pure reconnaissance, where the objective is to see without being seen, the Dingo was clearly superior. The 222's firepower advantage was irrelevant if it was spotted first. The American M3A1 scout car was not truly comparable. It was an armoured truck designed to carry 8 men with heavy machine guns, twice the length of a Dingo, and armoured with only 13mm of steel. The British classified it as a personnel carrier and never considered it a scouting alternative. The Soviet BA-64 was closer in concept, a 2-man armoured car, but was essentially an armoured jeep with just 15mm of maximum protection and a much taller profile at 1.9 meters. It was cheaper and had greater range, but it was mechanically crude and dangerously prone to rolling on slopes. Even British alternatives fell short. The Humber Scout car, built by the Roots Group from 1942 to supplement Dingo production, carried only 14mm of maximum armour, versus the Dingo's 30, lacked floor protection entirely, and missed the sophisticated H-drive and fluid flywheel transmission. Troops consistently rated it inferior. On paper, several rivals looked adequate. In practice, the Dingo offered the lowest profile, the thickest frontal armour, the quietest engine, the fastest reverse speed, and the most advanced transmission of any light scout car in any army. Its only trade-offs were limited armament and a 2-man crew. It was purpose-built for one mission. It executed that mission better than anything else on the battlefield. The Dingo was so successful that the British Army did not seek a replacement until 1947. Daimler received the development contract in October 1948. The result was the Daimler Ferret, which entered service in 1952 and directly inherited the Dingo's engineering DNA. The H-drive layout, the fluid coupling, the pre-selector gearbox, the independent suspension, and the run-flat tyres. The Ferret went on to serve in over 36 countries with 4,409 built. Dingos themselves proved remarkably long-lived in service. B Squadron of the 11th Hussars was still operating Dingos in Northern Ireland as late as January 1960, 20 years after their first combat. Portugal used them during its colonial wars until 1974. Cyprus and Sri Lanka operated Dingos into the mid-1970s. Today, over 50 surviving examples are documented across museums and private collections worldwide, including the Bovington Tank Museum, the Imperial War Museum, and the British Motor Museum in Coventry, the city where they were born. 1939. The Daimler Works, Radford Road, Coventry. A machine rolls off the production line. It is absurdly small. Too small to fight, too lightly armed to hold ground, too cramped for comfort. It had no turret, no cannon, no night vision, no radio on early marks. It carried only 2 men and a single light machine gun. It was underpowered by later standards, just 55 brake horsepower from a 2.5-litre engine. Its armour could not stop anything heavier than rifle fire and light shell fragments. And yet it worked. It worked in the sands of Libya, where it outran everything Rommel's gunners could aim at it. It worked in the mountains of Italy, where it squeezed down tracks that stopped larger vehicles dead. It worked in the hedgerows of Normandy, where its size made it invisible around corners that announced every other armoured car. It worked on the roads to Hamburg, where it led an entire armoured division into a surrendering city. It worked so well that the enemy captured one and built a factory to copy it. 6,626 were built. Dozens of regiments depended on them. Soldiers who were assigned Dingos refused to give them up. Soldiers who were not assigned Dingos rebuilt, wrecked ones from dumps and claimed them as their own. The Daimler Dingo was not powerful. It was not fearsome. It was not glamorous. It was small, quiet, fast, low, and nearly impossible to break. It did exactly what reconnaissance demands. It found the enemy, it reported what it saw, and it got its crew home alive. That is not luck.